And then finally, under item number 9, the commission felt that there certainly could be circumstances in which these standards may reasonably be exceeded if the conditions allowed it. And we have areas that are oftentimes zoned residential that aren't developed for many years and maybe very large tracts of land that could support a structure that's maybe larger than 1,000 square feet, or maybe have an exceedance of some other nature. So they provided a item under number 9, which is these standards may be exceeded with the approval of a conditional use permit that allows for that opportunity for a public hearing, input from the neighborhood, and for the Board of Adjustment to consider whether an exceedance should be permitted or allowed. And so that was the final specific use standard. As I mentioned before, the Planning and Zoning Commission conducted their public hearing on June 12th on this item and recommended approval of the proposed ordinance with one minor modification related to lighting, and it was to delete the exterior lighting. There was some discussion about lighthouses that could cause light trespass and glare, and that section of lighting was titled exterior lighting. And so we struck the exterior and just left it with lighting so that it could address that situation. That has been modified and is reflected in the ordinance that is in your packet this evening. So the council's action this evening is to conduct a public hearing.
Bill, if I may,
Yes, please.
do lighting again. You lost me. You didn't, you're not proposing exterior lighting.
We're proposing to delete exterior, so the light trespass and glare was not only limited to exterior lighting. They felt there could be circumstances with a greenhouse where interior lighting could cause exterior light trespass and glare. So they just wanted to delete the heading
It's the end result. Lighting,
Yeah, what the bottom line?
trespass lighting is, lighting that impacts off the property is a problem? Is that the end result?
So if you look at the draft on page 24 of 25, it would read, the heading of the section is lighting, under item number 3. It would read, exterior and interior lighting use associated with the operation of market garden shall be limited and shall not result in light trespass or glare upon adjacent residential uses.
So the greenhouses on what used to be Farm Road, but now named something else at WSU, where you can go by them and read a newspaper, would not be permitted.
That would be, they couldn't trespass. There could potentially be some screening, fencing, other actions, but they couldn't cause light trespass, which is really the primary issue.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, the commission recommended approval with that one minor change that has been incorporated within the draft. And the action for the council this evening is to conduct a public hearing, and upon consideration of the testimony presented, to either approve the proposed ordinance under suspension of the rules as presented, or approve the proposed ordinance with modifications or under first reading, obviously, or do not approve or take other action as deemed appropriate. With that, I would be happy to try to answer any questions that the council may have.
Thank you, Bill. Well done. Dan?
Okay, so let's walk through, if I wanted to use this ordinance to my advantage. This really doesn't change anything as far as somebody having a garden in their backyard.
Right.
Okay, but I have a vacant lot next to me that I decide to buy or get permission to use in some way. I don't necessarily have to own it.
Correct. You could lease it.
So I can build a garden there under this ordinance without having to come before any board or anything like that, should this ordinance be passed.
Correct. You could build a garden there, and you could certainly build a garden there on your own for your own accessory use. But if you wanted to grow the produce as a quasi-commercial activity and sell the produce off-site, take it to the farmer's market, get a stand and sell it down at the farmer's market, that again would be a permitted use by right. You would have those specific use standards you would need to comply with. If you wanted to set up a stand on site and have retail sales and sell it off the property, then you would have to get a conditional use permit for that activity.
And so basically, as long as I'm not selling on site or I can build a shed up to 1,000 square feet.
Correct.
Without having to get a permit?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, without having to get a conditional use permit.
Conditional use
You may
permit.
have to get a
Yeah,
building
I get a
permit
building
depending on
permit,
the type
okay.
of structure. Correct.
But it has to be a temporary structure.
Correct.
Okay. Greenhouses included, not.
Whole building, greenhouse, hoop house, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Walter?
Bill, when you began, you made a statement to the effect that gardens are not, we have an, whatever you call it, an exclusionary zoning system, and gardens are not spoken to. But using Dan's example, on my house lot, I could put a garden in the backyard and raise whatever, and there was no way for a neighbor who just plain doesn't like corn to come complain to the city and say, get rid of the corn. I could have a garden. It's
Correct.
already allowed.
There are a number of uses that are typically incidental and accessory to a permitted use that don't have to be specifically named.
So, to interrupt you, why do we need to have accessory garden now to name it?
I think the primary purpose was to distinguish it from the market garden, so that we could at least point to the distinction between the two, and include the reference to the keeping of animals in fowl as well.
Which is not being changed by this and already in code.
Already in code, but being now incorporated and referenced into the zoning code.
And accessory structures, too, were also not.
I could put,
Before.
could I not have done accessory, well, it would have been, it would have been in my home lot, so I could have put a tool shed back there.
Right, the accessory to the
The
residence. on the lot.
accessory structure is pertinent to his example of getting the lot next
The
door,
vacant lot,
the
right?
vacant lot.
Right.
I've seen this by title in P and Z agendas. I've seen it on whatever committee it may have gone through. I've not paid any attention to it, really figuring at some point it'd come around here. What was the impetus for this? What, you didn't have a slow day and look for something to do.
No, I think the commission had been, I mean, there has been a lot of activity within the community related to local food production. Just looking at the activity at the farmers market with all of these local groups, and the members of the commission just became aware of that subject, became interested in how the zoning code addressed it, and so we began the conversation. That led us to this point this evening.
So P and Z had a slow day and looked for something to do.
Like, kind of along with Walter's question is, how is this different from the way business is conducted already? I mean, we have market gardens, we have people that grow in their yards, and then they take it, so I suppose some of them take it to maybe farmer's market, or they sell to their neighbors. Why do we need this?
Well, that activity generally wouldn't have been explicitly permitted underneath the code. If it was accessory to a home for your own
Show
consumption.
me where it was prohibited in the code.
That's,
Not.
Well, that's the
That's what
exclusionary
I'm
nature
saying.
of the code. The exclusionary nature is if it's not named, it's by default disallowed. We had agricultural activities happening. We've got community gardens for some period of time on residential lots where that was not necessarily a named permitted use, but was just allowed to occur. We had individuals come into our office looking at properties where they wanted to start a ag activity. It was an R1 zone property at the end of Empire Lane. It wasn't ready for residential development. They wanted to know, can I do this? I had to say, well, legally, it's not named as a use as being the permitted use of a commercial garden or agricultural activity in the R1 district or the R3 district, whatever it was on that property.
Really, what you had to tell them is, well, we really don't address this.
As long as nobody complains about it, you might be okay, but it's not addressed in the zoning code directly.
I got it.
Other questions? Yes, Sue.
Well, part of it is that people have been raising crops for backyard harvest and for the food bank. And you could something in an accessory little greenhouse, very large plastic greenhouse in your own backyard, but in another lot, you couldn't do it because it wasn't accessory to anything. There'd be an empty lot, you couldn't put an accessory structure on it because it wasn't accessory to anything because there was nothing else on the lot. People also were putting gardens in their side yards and in their front yards and various places. And as Bill said, if it wasn't strictly permitted, then it was prohibited. And there's been there are people who are selling at farmers market who actually have several little gardens around town in empty lots and in people's property,
So, and we'll have more of this discussion after the hearing,
Right.
but what about?
I'm just trying to
other questions?
explain.
Yeah.
But he says why.
Why,
I
that's right,
explain
yeah.
why.
A question for Bill?
I think the why's been answered.
The why's
I'll
been
just wait
answered.
till, I'll just
All right.
wait
Any other
till the. after
questions for
public
Bill, just for staff, for clarification from staff before we have a public hearing? All right. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. As before, the way I'll conduct the public hearing tonight is just to invite citizen testimony and tell us what you think about this proposed ordinance pertaining to urban agriculture in the city limits. We have you state your name and address for our record. Try to be brief, concise in your remarks, and the council will consider those subsequent to the closure of the public hearing. With that, I'll open the hearing and invite your testimony. Okay. Seeing no one come forward, and I'll assume that you all heard all about it at the P&Z hearing, I'll close this public hearing and open it up to the council for its discussion.
Well, I'm just ready to make a motion. So,
I'm ready to hear
okay,
it.
great. Well, he's ready then. I just
All right.
wanted to make sure. I'm not gonna, I got a little bit stepped on, but earlier, but not really. I'd like to make a motion to approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have Tom's motion, we have Dan's second. Any discussion? Walter?
I'll vote for it under the heading of why not. I'm leery of unintended consequences because I wish some people had come, and even P&Z people, and told us you really need to do this because there's a real demand for it or something. I'm just a little nervous about doing something that just we're just kind of doing it. But that's okay. I'll go along and vote for it. And
I'm still a little concerned about the neighbor firing up his combine at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday.
Combine was not, and you can't have a wallaroo either.
If the crop is Kentucky bluegrass, that's the
Tom?
problem. I guess to kind of respond to that, the reason why I made the motion is that I feel like what we're doing here is catching up. The government in this situation is catching up to where the people are in how they want to use their land. Sometimes government is the leader and jumping out way ahead and making things happen. But I think in this particular case, people are already growing food and want to grow more food, and here's an opportunity for the city to, make our code react to the way people are using their land. We did the piece already in Title 10 in the, police code for the animals.
the world didn't come to an end when we approved chickens.
Right, so we're in this particular case, we're making the zoning code match up with what we said already to the police department. So I think it's a good idea just to kind of catch up.
Okay. Other discussion before voting?
I was just going
Sue?
to say, they also a lot of the work that P&Z did was making sure that the neighbors, with things like glare and, grow lights till 10 o'clock or something, would not be intruding on the neighbors. And so, because this is kind of infill. It's doing things that were already allowed in farm ranch and the ag zones, and that never was a problem. But now we're having infill and people doing gardens. So,
Tom?
I wanted to make sure that the motion that I made responded to the lighting issue that was addressed by Bill. That my intention was to
As it's
include
written
that,
now.
right?
it's already in it.
Right, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
And that's the
because
understanding, the seconders. All right.
I appreciate that observation.
Any other conversation? Okay. Hearing none, we'll start the roll call vote with you, Dan.
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously, as it did with our Planning and Zoning Commission. And that is going to be ordinance number 2013-15, an ordinance of the City of Moscow, Idaho, a municipal corporation of the State of Idaho, providing for the amendment of Moscow City Code Title 4, Chapters 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 11, and Chapter 12, providing for the definition of accessory garden, community garden, and market garden, providing for the allowance of accessory gardens, community gardens, and market gardens within all zoning districts, providing for the establishment of specific use standards for market and community gardens, providing that the standards for market and community providing for the establishment of specific use standards for market and community garden, providing that the provisions of this ordinance be deemed severable, and providing for this ordinance to be in full force and effect from the date of its passage, approval, and publication according to law.